Terron Armstead described the Miami Dolphins defense in OTAs as spooky. We're going to explore why here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Spooky was the word that Terron Armstead used to describe the Miami Dolphins defense to Kay Adams of Up and Adams in a appearance that he made on the show while Kay was at OL Masterminds, the summit, offensive line summit, earlier this month. Seventh year in which they've done the offensive line summit. Terron has been a regular staple there and took the opportunity to speak with Kay Adams and talked on a number of things that I think are of particular note and interest to Dolphins fans that are just now hitting the airwaves. So we'll get into it, with the first one being kind of the mystery around what's the Dolphins' offensive scheme going to be. You're anticipating there's going to be plenty of pull from what the Baltimore scheme with Mike Macdonald was last year. But there's been other influences, if you will, on Anthony Weaver besides just Mike Macdonald, who was kind of the hot prize defensive coordinator in this past cycle, who took his scheme to Seattle to play with the Seattle Seahawks. He has worked under Mike Pettin, Rex Ryan, Wink Martindale. These are all different influences and flavors of defensive styles and schemes. And some of them, like Wink and Rex, are very much double birds. We're coming. Like, we're going to be super aggressive. We're going to get after you. We're going to pressure you. It's going to be high stress, high strain, 60 minutes. We're not taking our foot off the gas pedal. And then you consider some of the other influences, and the Macdonald scheme is a little bit more cutting edge in the way of showing pressure and creating pressure without compromising the numbers on the back end, and still keeping numbers in coverage that allow you to feel as though you're sufficiently spacing the field. And that's kind of what Terron Armstead got into when he talked to Kay Adams. This was the direct quote: bringing in Weave, being defense coordinator Anthony Weaver, from Baltimore. Watching the defense in OTAs and minicamp was spooky. The looks, the disguises, the weapons he has, and the way he's using those guys. I love where we are. So he gives you a little bit here. The looks and disguises kind of gives you the impression that it is more of a Mike Macdonald type of scheme, right? Because the whole thing with Macdonald is the reason why he was so coveted as a defensive play caller was because of how they taught the pressures, how they taught their looks. And there are defensive players, they all learn the package. And then in the same way that Miami with their offensive personnel and some other teams across the league are like this, they try to have interchangeability amongst a lot of the pieces, right? Your wide receivers, you could be the X, you could be the Z, you could be the adjuster player in this scheme, which is the slot player, the third wide receiver, but that can also be a tight end or a fullback or a second running back. Like, there's a lot of different players that can step into that specific role. And for Miami, you see 21 personnel with two back. You don't quite see as much 12 personnel out of this offense. I'd like to think you're going to see more of that this year. But that interchangeability for the skill players is what gives the offense its multiplicity, right? In the Baltimore scheme under Mike Macdonald, players are learning 4 or 5 different alignments because they know what the pressure is and they know who the players are in any given pressure that are going to come and be a pressure player versus dropping out and playing coverage. So it's not quite the Brian Flores, Bill Belichick style Patriots 5-0 defense, with their pressure packages where they get everybody up on the line of scrimmage. It's the same general principle, but they do it in a different way. And they do it in a different way that doesn't compromise your structure. And I think you saw that in Minnesota last year with Brian Flores being the defensive coordinator. While they doesn't matter what the down and distance was, Flores had 7-8 guys up in line of scrimmage, and we're going to probably bring 5. We might bring 4. Sometimes we're going to bring 3 and we're going to drop everybody out. But the other times we're bringing 1 more than what you have to block with your offensive structure. And that is kind of the binary version of what the Macdonald scheme is, where you're encouraged as a defensive lineman to know all the alignments. And as long as you understand the pressure itself, you could theoretically line up in any of the pressure forward spots. So when Terron Armstead talks about the looks, the disguises, the weapons he has, and the way they're using his guys, I read between the lines on that a little bit. And that brings me to, okay, this is a lot of the Mike Macdonald type of thing. And that's where you hope the influences of Mike Macdonald, but then also Wink Martindale is a very aggressive pressure type coach, and Rex Ryan is a very aggressive type coach. You have that aggressiveness, but it's harnessed in a way that's very player friendly for the players to learn the pressures. And then it becomes X's on a chalkboard instead of this guy is a 3 technique. This guy's a nose tackle. Here's your 2 defensive ends. Here's your Sam backer. Here's your Will backer. And I know just from looking at resources from the Shanahan trio, and their offensive playbooks have front identification, right? And when you get up to the line of scrimmage, you have to make a call on what front they're in. And they have key code words. Say you're in nickel, right? And you have 4 down defensive linemen. You have 2 linebackers on the field, and you're playing in an over front with your defensive tackles shifted towards the tight end. That code in the Shanahan tree would be called a 42 king front. 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, over front king. So it'd be 42 king, right? And when you have interchangeability within the front, you can't get up to the line of scrimmage and say 93 is here. That's your 3 technique. We got to set the front based off of that when there's all of this interchangeability with the personnel. And it goes for the back end too, right? You think about the secondary. That can create misidentification of fronts, which then in turn can lead to errors in declared assignments at the line of scrimmage, which can then create more opportunities for your front to have run-throughs and attack. So that's hearing Terron Armstead get into spooky as the adjective to describe what's going on. That kind of nudges me more of, okay, we're not just going to be double barrel blitzes all the time. And we're not going to be kind of the conservative cover 2 type scheme. No, it's pulling a lot of what made Baltimore scheme. And it's why there's about 5 defensive coordinators across the league last year that were on that Baltimore staff last year, plus Mike Macdonald is the head coach. Like, it has that quickly grown legs and gone across the league. Now, the defense wasn't the only thing Terron Armstead talked about. We'll get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure you have access to the best qualified candidates possible, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job. Over 70% of users on LinkedIn don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong places. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional with LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses might not have all the resources that they would like to have for their hiring process, and that's where they're constantly making this process more streamlined and easier for you to find quality candidates. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Terron Armstead was also, and this is not the first time he has spoke on this offseason, spoke on the Tua Tagovailoa contract negotiations. And we're getting down to it, right? In training camp, first practice is less than a week from today. Veterans report in 5 days. If I had to guess, deadline spur action, I'd still guess something gets done. That would be my gut feeling. Terron Armstead seems to think so as well. This is what he was asked about Tua getting a contract extension of top quality on the quarterback market. It's going to happen. We need Tua to go anywhere we're trying to go. All of our dreams, goals, and aspirations are reliant on number one. The Dolphins know that. The organization knows that. The city, the league, the way they iron out the numbers, all that. Negotiations can get tough in contracts. Teams start to bring up bad plays, bad games, injuries. You start to get offended like, oh man, that's how you really feel, but it's leverage. Once you peel back all those layers and you keep it about the business, it will get done. I admire Terron's optimism. I also admire Terron's candidness about the nature of contract negotiations. And Terron would know, right? Like Terron's been a player who has been around the league for over a decade. He's been a player who has worked through several mega contracts. When you consider he came in the league in 2013, this is year 12 for him. He was not a part of the collective pre-2011 collective bargaining agreement when like players could negotiate their rookie contracts and end up being like top paid players on their team. So he came in with a structured rookie wage scale, played through that, earned himself a long-term extension with New Orleans, and then signed the 5-year deal in Miami that he's going into year 3. And now on those last several contracts are big dollars. So he's been in that position to sit down as a player who's had questions, right? Because his first year in the league, he played in 6 games. Then he played in and started 14 and 13 games. And then in 2016, his 4th year in the league, he played in 7 games. That's the end of that first round or that first rookie contract window. Is, he'd never played in a full season before he signed his first contract. And then it was 10 games and 10 games and 15 and 14. In his last season in New Orleans, he played in 8, and then he negotiates a contract with Miami. And that was 5 for $75. There was conditional money that was in there. That was per game active bonuses. They reworked that contract again this offseason. Like, he's been through this process a lot as a player who has high level impact, but always kind of had the questions. So to know that that's a player that Tua Tagovailoa has turned to through this process of his first time working on a new contract with his team, and having some parallels as far as the caliber of play, along with the questions that get brought up in the negotiation process. I can't think of a better person to be there and serve as a sounding board as one of your colleagues in the locker room. And Terron, he had presumably some uncomfortable conversations with the organization this past year or this past spring, because they converted salary. They put more stipulated dollars into however many games you played, you get paid for. There was a salary reduction there. And Terron himself is talking about some of those things with numbers and negotiations. Teams bring up injuries and bad plays, and you kind of have to compartmentalize what you feel and what your feelings give you versus what is the business of the team, looking out for their own interests. And Miami has been very deliberate with all of that as far as putting fail safes and exit ramps and having flexibility with contracts. And you would presume all of that with everything the Dolphins are working through with a contract that's going to be of the magnitude of what Tua's contract is creating extra layers to getting something done. But at some point, the rubber meets the road. And if a contract is not done when players report, I would expect Tua could very quickly expedite this process and choose to not partake in all of practice or any of practice. I don't think he would fully sit out. I think he would hold in and partake in some individual stuff, maybe do some throwing, but like 11 on 11 like he did at OTAs. If it's not done by then, I would suspect you'd probably see a similar strategy. And if it is, then you're as an organization, you don't want that hanging over your quarterback's head. You don't want that hanging over the team. Be a very unhealthy distraction very quickly. So we'll see if Miami bends before then, if Miami's final offer before report date is enough for the camp for Tua. We'll see. But Terron Armstead has given some good perspective as somebody who has lived this on more than one occasion. Now, speaking of training camp, have a primer for training camp that we're going to get into next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you stick with us. We all love sports, and this is kind of a tough time of year for sports because a lot of the sports stop sporting the way that you want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going all year long, even in the dead of summer. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up some bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is cooking all customers nice bonuses or boosts on a daily basis. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Let's talk about training camp because it's going to be here before we know it, and we are on the cusp of public practices. And I feel like this is a thing that we do on an annual basis here on the program. First public practice for the Dolphins is Sunday, July 28th at 10:40 a.m. And then they have public practices on Monday and Tuesday of that week as well. Then they're off. And then 8-1, 8-2 are practices. And then at 11:10, there is a scrimmage or team practice, if you will, at Hard Rock Stadium. So those dates are established. They've done the tickets thing for that. So if you have an opportunity to come to training camp, great. If you don't, there's going to be people who are there that are reporting within the confines of media credentials for the league policy. That would include me. What is going on? You'll also probably have a lot of tweets from fans in the stands that are giving a play-by-play, and there will be contention about what's true and what's not, and if a player would have been sacked or if a player wouldn't have been sacked. And this is where I go back to that same thing we alluded to earlier this week, process versus results, right? There's going to be install of things that the Dolphins try to put in that they're ultimately going to say, I don't think the light bulb's on here. We're not going to use this. But they have to work through all of it and install all of it to figure it out. So if you expect overwhelming performances from one side of the ball or the other all throughout training camp, I got bad news for you, right? There's ebbs and flows. There are ebbs and flows. And now is the time to try things to figure out how it all fits together. And I think that's very important perspective going into training camp practices, especially the first week, it's still a marathon, right? There's still a long time before you play your first meaningful football game for keeps. And bad practices, it felt like even last year, we're counting practice interceptions and incomplete passes, and the offensive line can't run the ball, but we're not wearing pads. And even then, it's like we're not going to the ground. So what is it with the value of it really? Just let it all play out, right? There's still a lot of value to be had from this. But as far as pushing the panic button based on the first week of practices at training camp, I would just encourage you guys to enjoy the ride, let the preseason play out. You're going to get more sample size. I think that's why the Dolphins are doing joint practices with all three teams that they play. They have joint practices with the Atlanta the week of the 5th. They have joint practice with the Commanders 2 days before their preseason game against Washington. And then they have joint practice with Tampa 2 days before their preseason game with the Bucs on the 23rd. So you're going to figure out against a varying degree of Atlanta's got some pretty strong offensive line plans, some good skill players. Washington should be a good test for you with your interior offensive line with Deron Payne and John Allen and what they have there. They have some speed at wide receiver. They have speed at quarterback. It should be helpful for you to gauge where the pass rush is at. The Tampa Bay game, they have size in the skill group. They have mass up the middle. They have speed in the secondary. There's different ways in which each one of these teams is going to be enlightening for you. So to get through the first week of practice against yourself, put stock in it by all means. You want to know what players are performing well. But if everything isn't clicking at first, that would just be my reminder for this time of year to take that in particular with a grain of salt, because you're going to have a full month and a half of preparations before you play your first football game, and to figure out what's going in on the install. Hey, we didn't handle these pressure looks particularly well with this type of scheme. Maybe we need to install something else for that. Hey, we ran the ball really well against this look. Maybe let's go out and run it the next day against a different kind of front. Oh, we didn't run the ball that well in that kind of situation. Like there's a lot of trial and error from an install perspective too. Just food for thought as we get ready for training camp. Now we have another show coming this week, at least. We'll see what else comes down the pipeline. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you list your favorite podcasts. I'm Kyle Krabs, host here on Locked On Dolphins. I appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Go Dolphins. I'll talk to you all again soon.